And we're off. And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. We're back after missing a week after the maiden victory for the franchise in Dallas, and then didn't really follow up on Sunday, Paul. And that was a tough watch, really. I think Sunday. It was the first game in the number of weeks where it had been at a reasonable time, and you could sit and watch it and enjoy it on a Sunday. It was a great opening 20 seconds or so, but they failed to kind of live up to any level of consistency like they've done all season. But despite scoring, 27, 28 points, that's got to be the worst defeat in the D'Amico Ryans era, I think.
Yeah, I think it probably has. It comes pretty close to the Jets game last season, where they had Zach Wilson at quarterback. I think it was pretty close call between the two. But yeah, it didn't sit well. Watching it on Sunday, I got almost as frustrated watching us on Sunday as I do watching the soccer sometimes, and it's probably not a healthy position to be in because it can be quite emotional watching the soccer. But yeah, it wasn't great, and we'll come on to it. But I'm pretty sure it was mainly down to our own doing. Really, shot ourselves in the foot too many times, and when you do that repeatedly, you probably don't deserve to win a game, no matter how well your defense plays.
Yeah, no, I wrote after the game. I've not been tweeting all that much. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and I suppose it was obvious what was going to happen to this team in many senses. And I said when a two-win team, or a 2-bit team, or a 2-win team can come into your building, who is in theory your biggest rival, with all the history, thievery that goes on, and completely unmask two of your biggest flaws to the point where you cannot respond, is an issue. And I think ultimately this team has chronic flaws that they can't shake or mask through schematics, through narrowed responsibilities of certain personnel, through breadth and depth of the roster to not lose a game in a way that, okay, on another day, right, I fully accept if you don't get the stupid fucking penalty on the two men in motion, that 33-yard touchdown Nico Collins with sort of 3 or 4 minutes to go puts you up, and you probably do win it. I get that. And it would have been maybe another really close victory, and it might have been a defensive stand to stop them, as there have been many times when we've won these close games and the defenses had to walk off the field on fourth down as the clock expires. Well, that's not really good enough, I think, for this talent level. And don't get me wrong, you were hoping that the sort of second full game of Nico and Mixon being out there was gonna yield you some offensive production, but I think it's not that simple. And it's although those two guys can give you sparks at times, I think this offense is so deeply flawed on the offensive line and and at other positions as well, if we're honest. Um, and it's just not fixable, I think. Now, could this coaching staff mitigate these flaws by making changes? Because we don't call plays like we look like we can't protect up front. We didn't look like we'd set protections like we're going against Jeffrey Simmons, one of the probably top 3 or 4 edge interior rushers in the league. We didn't look like that we could exploit them at linebacker. In fact, actually, the two linebackers, just sat and blocked the cutback lanes, and that was enough to do your run game. So 2 interior guys you couldn't handle, and the 2 linebackers just sit and held those lanes either side. They didn't expect it. The players talked about it, and that was all it took. But then, at what point do you recognise that and go, right, actually, instead of running any inside plays, because they quite clearly didn't work, and they went back to the well continuously, time and time again, and got no yardage or no positive plays were yielded at any point by doing that. Why didn't they say, right, halftime or third quarter. We're not going to run it at all, but here is 5 design checkdowns to Joe Mixon to get the ball in his hands. And we're going to go to them on first, second, or whatever downs that we would normally have called run plays. Because today, for a variety of factors, for the way we've planned it, for the way they've schemed it, this ain't going to work. And I think in terms of the way they set pass protection at times, the 2 point Dan Orlovsky impression, it's a single one-on-one Juice Scruggs against Jeffrey Simmons when you're backed up in your own end zone, when he just about sacks you and they gave you a safety the play before. So like the recognition of the challenge isn't shown in the game plan or the scheme to overcome some of the deficiencies in your Jimmys and Joes. Your X's and O's are not there, and I don't know if is it a question I can come back to in my head. Is it not coaching with the flaws in consideration, or is it just bad coaching?
The two questions there. I think the first one you asked is when do you recognise that it isn't going to work, this interior run? And I think the honest answer to that probably leads into the second answer. And the answer to the first one is when you start watching the video of the Titans earlier in the week. They've got Simmons and Sweat, who are both two very good interior guys, and you should know that with the way our line is, it's going to be difficult to find any space to run inside. So you have to factor that into the game plan, and that probably leads into the second one of it. I think a lot of it is coming into some bad coaching especially on the offensive side of the ball. It just looks all out of sorts, doesn't it, really? Timing looks off. There's people making... We can talk about the line as much as we do with their false starts and penalties like that, but, having too many motion on that play that gets pulled back is criminal, really, isn't it? These guys spend all week doing this, and I think that's more of a coaching thing, really. They don't know who's meant to be in motion where. There was one earlier in the game where, after the play, CJ's trying to explain to Stover that he's trying to throw the ball away. And Stover catches
he
it.
tries to catch it 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage.
And you're like that's a coaching thing. Surely there's things that can be done to make everybody aware that this is what's going to happen. And that's what I think it comes back to at the moment, these type of things. So, it's on the offensive side of the ball, it's not great, and I'd say it's coming down to coaching. Defensive side, they're leaving some of these big gaps and leaving some of this space, but they've been there since the start of the year. When we've managed to hide it for a larger extent. But the Titans, I was just watching something before we jumped on, and I don't know how many yards Levis had in total, but apart from the 4 long plays, he only had 80 yards in the air. But the 4 long plays were nearly 200 yards or something like that. It's crazy. So
yeah. And it was just a weird game, and I suppose that if you just look on that, that play that gets called back, you have the first play of the game against Dallas, and you have no recognition of that cost you a big play at the start of a game that could have build some great momentum and could have made a very different result. And for that to happen again 2 weeks in a row, I think it's inexcusable, if I'm honest. And there's just too much of that. And then you had the 2 plays back to back for the same penalty that backed it up, Tunsil and then Scruggs, both on the left hand side, which I just don't see a way in which this gets better. That's the worst bit about it, I suppose. And as you said, the second unmaskable flaw is, I don't know why you want to run quarters coverage when you've got a safety who can't cover, and then you've got a linebacker who's susceptible to getting caught in the run. And don't get me wrong, Henry To'oTo'o has been a great improvement in the season, right? Coming downhill, and I think he's probably a good 3rd or 4th linebacker on your team. But I think the position of the team now, whether that's Christian Harris's injuries, unexpected, and they sort of touched upon that during the week, his level of play at times in the passing game isn't good enough, and that might sound a bit harsh for some people, but there's been enough examples this season. The Detroit game and the Green Bay game, he made mistakes, and then he doesn't recognise the play fake, and then Eric Murray misses the tackle, the sort of safety pass off, or safety recognition of play, and or asking Eric Murray to be a starting level safety is going to cause you issues, and it's been, even in the New England game, you get both of them caught out of position and for easy scores and big gains, and it's going to continue to be this way for this team. I think as long as you try and trot them out there, and look, they have, because on a defense in a day where you've got two edge rushers that look unplayable at times. Don't get me wrong, Will Levis gave you, three of those sacks at least. But you rack up 8 sacks, but then when you let a tight end go 70 yards on a one-play scoring drive just after you've scored, isn't really great. So it's very rarely have we played complementary football has the offense performed as the defense has performed. It's been either, there's been very few times where, apart from early in games, the offense has scored and the defense has kind of scraps its way in the front, has led it through games, and this in the secondary has been intermittent. And there's been plenty of times where there's been big plays that should have happened that weren't connected with. And this was one of those days that just those big long balls that the Callahan scheme is trying to take advantage of hit most of them, and they were all kind of crossers or deep overs to this, to try and distract the safety, and the both, three big plays, that contributed, as you said, to the majority of his yards. And when your quarterback gets outplayed by Will Levis, I think that's a concern, isn't it? And I suppose, Paul, how much of this defeat now do you put on CJ? Because I think the first interception, that can happen, right? It was, they said it on the broadcast, it was zone coverage. So, the inference, or the inclination for the wide receivers to sit down and just hold the space and take the easy completion. But I think Mechie thought the defensive back was closer to him than he was, and he didn't have to do that. And he could have kept running. He probably left 2 or 3 yards on the catch, even if he caught it at the point where CJ thought he was. The second interception's piss poor, and the step at the back of the end zone, just a lack of awareness. I don't get me wrong, there was some great throws, but I think all our issues, he's burdening them on himself, on his shoulders every time he gets the ball back there. And it may be he's not got enough control because he looks pissed off at times. It may be pissed off with the play call, and he may be pissed off with the offensive line not doing his job, and he's having to obviously front it in the public. But it just looks like all the struggles have eroded what was the elite qualities of his game, in terms of throwing with anticipation, throwing guys open, having great field vision. His eyes are dropping into the rush as there's more bodies at him. I think there was 7 free rushers at him this week, and every time there's a sort of secondary pressure that we don't pick up pre-snap, and you see that play over and over again where he scrambles and has to throw it away. And I think there's only so many times you can go through that with an element. I suppose it must be without his control. He's not given the autonomy to check at the line or change to a different play, or is the centers reliant on spotting the protection, and then teams are fooling us easily. But it just seems the same old stuff every week, and then it's just 1 or 2 plays that he makes a mistake in, and it's enough to probably lose you a game at this level. And I think that it just looks like he's just carrying it all every down, trying his best to make a play, but it's just not happening for him. And it's almost kind of closing in him ever so slowly in the results and the performance. Still through for 250 yards or so, but it looks heavy in his head and his physical demeanour.
Yeah, it looks like he's taking the whole weight of the franchise on his shoulders right now, doesn't he? And it's probably not a healthy position to be in. And I think it's probably a mixture of all the things you said, really. I don't think the coaching on that side of the ball is particularly good. Don't think the play calling particularly helps him. There's still moments in there, where he's showing that, he's got all the ability in the world, and I think he's quite rightly talked up to the level that he is, and was last season especially. The throws to Nico looked great. He threw one to Tank Dell right on the sideline, which was just like inch perfect. And it was the one place on the coverage where the defender just couldn't get to it, no matter what he did. I
Hmm.
don't think the defender could get
Yeah.
to that. But I don't know how much of that is play calling or him going, I need to make a play here and making something happen. And maybe I don't know if that's off script or whether that was a scripted play, but you know, there's something that's got to change, and whether it's giving him more control over what's happening or making more things in the playbook available, they need to do something because I think that side of the ball is definitely hampering the team currently. And you know, when you see some of the teams that we're going to be playing in the next run, you know, they've got people that can punish you on both sides of the ball, and it could become quite difficult.
I think
So
he's been failed in equal measure. And I'll come back to the head coach. We put the head coach aside because I think that's almost a separate line. But I think he's been failed in equal measure by coaching in terms of the scheme. And I think he's been failed in terms of the front office as well, in terms of, lack of um, like this is the offensive line they built, and it's clearly not good enough. The coaching who were selected, or a coach who was selected who never ran the scheme before, kind of got away with it in year one, year two, when there's people are throwing different stuff at you, and you have to evolve and coach technique consistently. And the fundamentals for somebody who's never done it before is probably difficult. I know you've got Bill Lazor. There's a sort of senior offensive assistant who's been around the league for a long time, but I think there's the coaching staff and the scheme and the fact that Bobby Slowick's still in a job, I think, is he's lucky, and I don't expect them to make a change. And I think they'll see it through to the end of the season, if I'm honest, just based on probably in some way the equity that he gained last year, in some way in terms of I think what the coach they think he could be, and maybe secondly they're not quite sure if Gerard Johnson's ready to do that. If how much play calling experience does he have? I think he does have a pre-season from memory. I'm tempted to say I may be wrong on that. But then if you look at the makeup of we have no running back too. That's successful. I think a lack of. Don't get me wrong, they invested a lot in the wide receiver options, and they were unlucky with the Brevin Jordan injury. But I think Jordan Schultz has let himself and the team down consistently this season. And when I go through that offensive, roster, apart from going on, I really it's got to that point. I've seen enough. I mean, that play where Ali, who was here, and he ran through free, and Shaq missed pulling to come and pass in it, and so he was off the snap. Plays I think I've seen for a long time. She had an answer, doesn't chip. He just through. It's a bit of a disaster all round, Julian. I think it was just one of those plays that just kind of summed up the offense just as much as the Nico Collins 33-yard touchdown ends up getting called back because of a lack of concentration, lack of awareness and responsibility for the role, and it was just one of those where it was just again small things, that kept you out of taking a lead in the game. But just in the same way, Tennessee tried to turn it over 3 times for you, two of them which you recovered, and it wasn't a winnable game for the average football team. But when the coaching and the decisions are coming up on one another, it just feels like you're ever going to get if you're going to get any growth. Because I keep thinking to myself, well, it can't be this bad all season. Like bad teams play better than this at some point, or
and we're in
play
week
play better
13.
than their level, you know. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
at some point, you've got to just think, surely they'll play well once because it's been unwatchable almost every game apart from a small handful of drives. Because it's mistakes, it's bad, it's just so many things compound. They've just never had a game where you thought, it was good to watch today. It really hasn't been. There hasn't been one, over the piece. You just think, how is that possible? How can it be so bad? But it's just, I think there's just so many mistakes or so many inefficiencies at different levels that you need it all to come together. And I feel for CG and guys like Nico and stuff who deserve better, because I think there's either guys that aren't bought in, they aren't coached well, they don't know the responsibilities in the scheme, or the coaches shouldn't be there and we need to clean house. But from the coach, every coach on that offensive staff, every player apart from those ones I mentioned, I would happily move on from next season, because ultimately it feels like this whole team and this whole thing has just been dragged backwards when growth seemed inevitable. Now, played a harder schedule. I get it. But it is fucking unwatchable football at time, and that shouldn't be possible when you got a franchise quarterback like this, because it just shouldn't be.
I mean, yeah, it's the hardest schedule, but Tennessee aren't a completely good team. They have some good individuals, but they're not a good team. Jacksonville are not a good team. Indy maybe okay. I don't think they're great when you see some of the play that when you have red zone on in the background and you see some of the play they put out. They're not a superb team, and we've made some of these teams look decent. I think I yeah I do feel sorry for CJ, for Nico. I feel really sorry for the guys on the other side of the ball who, I think, if we were a 10-2 team, this defense would be talked up even more than it is, even with its deficiencies of giving up long plays, getting 8 sacks in a game, and bringing up guys from the practice squad who are getting sacks. It is a good defense, and they're being let down by the other side of the ball currently. But I mean, you look at the end of I know you shouldn't always look backwards, but you look at the end of last season when you know CJ didn't have as good a weapons as he's got now, and it seemed like the play calling was a little bit looser, a little bit more explosive, letting people go after things, and you had Noah Brown out there and others, and Noah Brown was doing 150-yard receiving games and things like this because it was more explosive, and now it feels like we're hamstringing our best talents really, and holding them back, and for what
Yeah,
at this time of the year? What are you holding them back for? You know,
yeah. And I
Tennessee
think it's just that,
Tennessee were there to take apart.
yeah, it's the ability to maintain drives at times when you need to. There was I think it was 6 drives where they barely killed even what would 3 runs would be equivalent off the clock. And I think when you only end up running a small handful of plays, you're 3 for 13 on third down. It's Don't get me wrong. The big plays skewed it, and obviously missing that short field goal. Right, I get it. You go from one obscurity of kicking a record number of over 50-yard kicks for Kiami to then miss a chip shot, which he's done in the past. He's done it again. He's done it in both losses. Every time he misses, I think that's been a direct correlation to his losing games, because the games that we have won are tight, and where he's been flawless, that's kept the fine margins that the offense has been able to produce for him to then go and kick long field goals. But that's not a sustainable model to win games. And I think it's like the run game just collapsed, right? So you had no balance, but then you continued to run it, and it was not a fruitful strategy. I think when you're starting to run it into 2 big bodies, and that play where the rookie Sweat just bodied uh, Shaq Mason. I think he's maybe done. I think that, like, it was at times last year and the year before, I think it was questionable whether he was good enough or not. They paid him money, which kind of seemed pricey at the time. But there was just, you shouldn't, as a veteran player, get ragdolled one-armed by a rookie. And I think that was just when we played against Detroit and we put on Sunday, I think at times we're a bit of a soft team. And I think, there's, don't get me wrong, there's been periods where I think this defense physically asserts itself, but on offense, we've got no physicality up front, and we've not got a good enough mix of skill sets, from the blocking the tight ends and the blocking the wide receivers to the physicality of the linemen to go and insert yourself in games to give you a chance to win, and make plays when you have to have them. Because there was multiple short yardage plays that they did not make. They punted it on a 4th and 2 towards the end, and it was just a series of kind of unfortunate, I think, scenarios. Then another day it probably goes your way, and I get that, and
Yeah,
that's
and
it's a league,
we've
it's a
had
league of inches.
yeah, and we've had a few of them, haven't we? When you look back on another day, maybe the Green Bay one doesn't end the way it does. Maybe the Detroit one doesn't end the way it does with like last second field goals. But these games like the weekend, we should be miles out of sight. We
Yeah,
should be miles out of sight. And when your defense is getting, well, when you're getting a pick six, 8 sacks, 13 TFLs or 15 TFLs, whatever it was, you know, you should be winning games more comfortably than what we are in general. And you should be winning the weekend, really. Because that game should be over when you see them defensive stats. And that's as simple as it is, really, isn't it?
yeah, and
Difficult to get away from that point.
it was all undone by, I think that I heard the Athletic talking about the other day that, that's only the third time, or what is like once in every 10 years, where the quarterback in Levis had such a negative EPA rating, but yet still threw for as many yards and won the game, as that. So it was just those four big plays that just let you down, and everything else becomes irrelevant when you let a 70 odd yards touchdown against a tight end gut you, in the fourth quarter, when when you just scored a pick six, because statistically scoring a pick six gives you an exponential chance to win a game, and it's just so frustrating, I think. And that's the thing. And I suppose I suppose, I mean, get all the specifics, but it's just a mix of penalties, bad tackling. That was when we'd back them right up, and Pollard bounces off, I think, four guys and then gets it out for a first down, when you thought, if we just flip the field position here, we can go and let's kick a field goal and assert a lead. And I think it's just, at times, just anything that could have let you down in small increments just all piles up. Darian Gavwali let it bounce in the end zone, having to run back in, getting a safety in when you're backed up at your own end zone, when actually we were been in those situations previously, we looked great and called them great. But you leave Scruggs one-on-one with a premier interior rusher, and it just looked so fucking obvious at times. And I suppose, does the sort of the complexity and the amount of issues we've got on the offensive side of the ball just make this season so predictable? It's almost it's almost not watch. It's not worth watching. Is that, can I say that? Is it, because you kind of know what's going to happen already, because we're going to win this South, really. I think, even if we only beat Tennessee, if we beat Tennessee again, we might have to, not win that game, not necessarily win that game, but if you beat Miami and Jacksonville in your next two, that's probably going to be enough, because you've got the 2-game lead over Indy. And then you're going to be one and done, definitely done in the second game again for the second year in a row. If you scrape by, you might get a good performance at home. Um, but right now, I can't see any logical reason why this offense would finally gain some cohesion and actually just looks even serviceable to give this team a chance. And it just looks like it looks like a foregone conclusion. And I hate to be watching the games that, but it's hard to think anything else.
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, I think they need to try and release the shackles a little bit, and give the option for some explosive things, and bring some energy and excitement back into the offense. I think it looks a little bit too cautious for everybody we've got there. I think it looks a little bit too cautious, really. And you saw last season in some of the games when you were putting Dalton Schultz into space. You got player there that can do it, and at the moment, he doesn't. whether he's carrying a knock, but we don't see it on the injury reports, or something's wrong. But he's not the player that we had last season that we signed up to a big deal. But
Is he the
on
biggest disappointment on this roster this season?
from where he was last season, he's close, isn't he? You know, with everything else, all the other weapons at the start of the season that we had on offense, you'd have thought he'd have been a really good one to fit into all of that. And I don't think he's been on it since the very start, if I'm honest. But you said about the safety, and we keep coming back onto penalties, but we were backed up on our own goal line because of a penalty during a kick-off, weren't we? Am I right remembering that right?
Yeah, you half
Didn't
distance to
we?
the goal. Back it up.
Didn't we? Blocking in the back, like blimey. It,
Yeah, I mean
it's
penalties.
not even.
Penalties
It's
is
not
the
even bad
ultimate.
luck, is it?
No, penalties is the ultimate byproduct of a poorly coached team, in my
Yeah,
opinion. Uh,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
mental
When you
mistakes are
like,
one thing because you can coach a player well and they could just make mental mistakes, but with the frequency at which we make these mental mistakes, um, suggests bad coaching. And don't get
yeah,
me wrong, there's just some flaws on this team that are so fucking obvious you could drive a fucking bus through at times. Um, another episode of who just ran by that safety because his eyes were in the wrong place because he didn't understand his cues next to the cornerback next to him. And then there's just certain guys that make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. I get that, and that's a part of doing business in this league, 100%. But with the regularity of the mistakes we make, and then you have good players making mistakes, that's when you've got problems. And I don't know if that's just a mental checkout, just a slump that you're in. And the bye week's so perilously late because I suppose you've got Jacksonville this Sunday where you've got to win to try and just kind of buffer this record because you're getting, if you creep back that close to 500, it's just been not a disaster of a season. There is stuff being gained, but it doesn't feel like a season of progress or one that would necessarily fill you with promise. It's almost like you're kind of back, similar position, not similar to where you were this year, but not as farther on as last year would have, suggested you should be. And so this is a game that they've got to, I thought Dallas might be that, and it was to a degree, but it wasn't consistent. And they're a really poor team that's just chucked it. Jacksonville are not far off. This should have been an easy 3 wins in a row for a team that has any aspirations of being serviceable or competitive in a playoff setting. Because if we, and the worry is that you're going to either get the Steelers, who are a really well coached team, or you're going to get the Chargers, who are also a really well coached team under Harbaugh this year. And if you come up against those two, I think we could be one and done at home. Um, and you might get Denver potentially, just the way it may fall. Um, Again, Sean Payton, decent coach, and I suppose when you add all this up, right, we've got to put Jack. There's no point predicting because Christ knows what's going to happen this Sunday. I bet you it's not great to watch, and
be 5 points in it.
it'll be close because that you could say that about every game this season, right? So let's just call that's the preview done. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. But I suppose the bit is how much does D'Amico have to look at? Because I heard him say this, and I'll drop it in the intro. But he said how much this one stings, and you seen the grimace on his face when he took that headset off when the camera zoomed in on a Sunday. And it's in this league, it's about bouncing back from adversity, and you lost 2 games in a row, so you didn't do that, right? By definition. You then win a shitty game on the road on Monday night, which anybody, even a team pushing for the first spot in the draft could have beat that Cowboys team the other night. But yeah, it felt like they maybe took on a little bit to heart how much, a result. Oh, we put 34 points up. Well, fucking yippee. But I suppose that the issue is for me, a good leader, not a guy that there's a difference between a good leader who recognizes problems and makes the necessary changes versus the guy that wants to be liked because the best people aren't necessarily liked that much because they have to make hard decisions and it'll impact people and they won't necessarily be liked as a result of that. And I always kind of go back and forth that with D'Amico. Is he, I'm not saying he's a popularity contest, and I do believe in some facets as a leader, but there's a difference between being a leader in the field and a good position coach and a good play caller versus a good head coach. And when faced with, quite clearly, failings on the offensive side of the ball, for me, the biggest criticism in his era right now. He's failed to act and make changes. I don't believe replacing an injury and swapping two players in the offensive line and putting a different centre in was enough or was a proportionate reaction to the issues that we have. And for me this season, D'Amico's failed himself in this team by his lack of action, attacking our quite clearly chronic offensive problems on that side of the ball. And I hope it's something he reflects on, Paul. But is that too harsh, or am I in the right ballpark with that?
No, I don't think it's too harsh. I think I think that goes part and parcel with being the head coach of a football team, doesn't it? You have overall responsibility. Usually you'd have your offensive coordinator who's calling the plays and your defensive coordinator who's calling the plays. But obviously D'Amico does that for the defense. But he has to. There's a certain amount of ownership he has to take for the team's struggle on offense. Now it probably isn't all down to him, and different managers will put people in a position and allow them to do it as they see, but they should step in when things aren't going right, and that's the point where it needs to be. But I listened to him just on a Texans radio thing on YouTube, and he was saying, on Monday they sat down in the meeting room and went through, I think he said 60 plays where things should have been done different. And he said it was uncomfortable for a lot of people, and we're not in the room, but you kind of have to take that as it is. And then he said by Friday we go from Monday where they're doing that to Friday where he's trying to bring the energy back in the room and it being a short, sharp meeting. Yeah, I think there'll be some very hard conversations come the end of the season when they review the season, and then some pretty big decisions made on both players and staff. But I think that'll be early January, I think.
Yeah, and you've got the nucleus of a good defense there. I just think we need to improve at linebacker. We have to improve at safety, with multiple additions.
What's the deal with Harris? I haven't didn't see any news
I
on it.
heard Nick Caserio talking about it on 610. He said he described it as like one in a so many, however, statistic, anomaly situation. I think they've had more setbacks in him because they brought him off IR, right? So they must have thought he was almost there, and then he's nowhere near, and they're talking about him playing after the. I'd be surprised we don't see him all year, to be honest, at this rate. And really, if there was any question about his health, would that be worth it? And I think the answer is no, based on where this team is, because it's not going to be a difference between winning the Super Bowl. If he's healthy or not, is it? I think, let's be honest. And he had a great run towards the end of last year, but his year and a half up to that point, his career wasn't great. So I don't necessarily think there's any major rush to do that. And he's not going to give you exponential growth in the passing game either at linebacker. So yeah, I think, was this team going to be all the way there? No, but if it played well, I think there was a suggestion, or an inclination to believe that if they got momentum and got hot, they could be a team to watch. But I don't even think this fucking offense could get lukewarm. It's disappointing, Paul, and I suppose it's maybe just when you get ahead of your. I think everybody's in the same boat, that there's a sense of being underwhelmed by CJ in year two. I think there's an underwhelmed by the talent that they thought they had around them. And I suppose it just shows you can never take anything for granted. It's a year-to-year league by definition. Guys like Schultz look good for you, and then he falls off. Guys like Shaq Mason look like they've fallen off. And those fucking two tackles, I think, are the epitome of bad contracts. And I suppose you've got to question at times, are they good at of picking up and evaluating defensive players mid-season, draft, free agency? It would seem so. I think they've got a lot out of the defensive tackle spot that you probably wouldn't have expected them, or feasibly could have expected these players to play like based on their career arc prior to this season. But it's been the complete opposite on the offensive side of the ball. And I think particularly the offensive line with Kenyon Green being a bust, I think you've got to say Juice Scruggs is getting pretty close. It's still early in his career, and I think year three is the one for linemen. But the fact you've moved him out of centre when you jumped up to pick him in the second round and he looks so fucking goddamn awful and overmatched to the same way Kenyon Green did, then that might just be the way the guys next to him are communicating to him. And I wouldn't put that past Mr. Second highest paid tackle in the league, because I don't necessarily think he's in it all for the glory of the team at times. And I don't think Titus Howard was ever worth that contract. And I've said that many times. And I think when you add that all together, it's a bit of a sorry mix, because it's the most important team, and there isn't many bad offensive lines on teams that think they're going to win things. And I think ultimately you should be drafting that high every year, because until you crack it, the rest don't mean shit. Because the best example is, isn't it, taking Penny Sewell or Jamar Chase, and Chase is a great player. He's probably going to be the highest paid player at the position in the league and overtake that Jefferson contract, but there's no substitute for having a good line. And just look at the quarterbacks in Philly, to a degree in Pittsburgh this year. The Chargers have invested in it. Denver have invested in it. Undoubtedly, the Ravens are good at drafting it. Green Bay are good at drafting it. All the teams that are consistently up there don't struggle with this. And until you find these struggles as a thing of the past, your ceiling, your ability to achieve what you think you can achieve based on the positions it's in the skill or quarterback spots, will be undermined by the lack of production or talent or functionality there. And when you don't coach like you've got a problem, how do you expect to even try and cover it up when the talent's so blatant? So I think I just think you can't get past it, and it's just an unfixable flaw, unfortunately, because we seem to be unable to accept it, in the with the severity that I think it needs addressed by with play calling and coaching. So you never know. You just never know. We've still got one game and then 5 games to go, with a bye in there,
So,
which is
yeah,
much
and some
needed.
yeah, it is. I think it's much needed to give everybody some space. I think more than anything, get people out of the building for a period of time where they don't have to look at each other and you know be grumpy. But I think some of the teams after the bye are going to be into the later stages of their season as well. They're going to be coming off the back of big long stretches of runs because some of them had early buys, and you know I don't think anybody particularly had the Chiefs being taken down to a very last gas field goal to beat the Panthers at any point this year or the next 5 years. And the Ravens are going through a bit of a. I mean, they won last night, I guess, but they're going through a bit of stop and start and don't look like 100% every time, do they? But it's going to
No,
be
and I
tough.
just think with our issues and with the coaching staff, I've got no faith that they can get the team ready to play Kansas City and Baltimore within 5 days. No, I mean it's just wrong from a safety point of view that that's been scheduled that way, right? But Netflix is paying good money for that on Christmas Day, and
Yeah,
so
I haven't
times the.
broached that with I haven't broached that subject with the wife yet, so she doesn't know there's a
Well, it's
game.
9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. There'll be a lot of people asleep by then, so you'll be all right.
Oh,
Just
okay.
keep topping the drinks up, and you'll be fine. But I think the issue is I've got no confidence in them being able to coach that based on what we've seen on short weeks, and prime time appearances. Um, so really, you've kind of got these next 2 games to kind of get yourself functional, or is it just going to be more of a slog? I think it's going to be a
It's
slogfest
like,
really from here on out, isn't it? It just feels like we've got a rot that we can't shake, and it's going to need some root surgery to get us out of this. But I hate to say that with that lens we're watching these games, because this should be fun, right? This should be another position, but it just seems we've got a self-imposed ceiling through so many factors here that it feels like even a talent like CG is not going to be able to uncover that, despite him letting the hair go. Jealous of a man that can grow that. But he let the hair loose, but he ain't playing loose right now.
no. Where would you? I mean, this is looking to the future. Where would you? Our first pick in the draft that we have next year, or where would you go? Would you, if the big issues that we have, would you go DB help, or would you go onto the line? It's you've got to you got to do both of them, really, haven't you? But
Mm. Yeah, I
It's
don't think necessarily one's a bigger issue than the other because one's costing you points and one's preventing you from scoring points. So,
yes,
um,
they both need doing. So
yeah, and I don't know. I think our offensive linemen easy to come or good quality offensive easy to come by in free agency now. Um, are we getting to a point where we've got a lot of big bills due and we're going to necessarily pay out, you know, 3 to 4 year deals now? So we're going to have to find them in the draft. But I suppose this front office has shown they can't evaluate offensive linemen as it stands, really. You know, so I don't know how fixable it is. A lot of it's luck and best player available and lands to you and all that kind of stuff. But they've had opportunities to draft other players who were far better than the ones fucking Kyle Hamilton over. Don't get me wrong, maybe not necessarily a perfect scheme fit for what D'Amico wants, but you know, you could play a similar role to what Petrie's playing. I know you took Petrie in that draft as well, so you know, we could all revise history. I don't know. It just you just got to get better. I think that's it. You've just got to try and improve every side of the ball in every position this off season because really with these big contracts coming up, you've only really got next year where you'll have a bit of luxury and then it's going to be tough choices thereafter. So I think that's why this season's so disappointing because year 2 and 3 of that rookie contract are kind of the sweet spots. 4, you're kind of creeping out about 5. Then you just got to hope you've drafted well the 2 years before. Otherwise, you're not going to be a great team, and it's going to be up and down based on a number of factors, luck and health and injury and all that. So yeah, it doesn't feel great, but I suppose it should feel better than it has been. I think it's just the manner of the defeats and the how easily some of these were avoidable, but then also some of these wins could have easily gone against you. So it's been so much. I'm just disappointed in D'Amico, if I'm honest, because I thought he was better than this. And when faced with tough challenges, he's kind of shirked away from it really, and said, "Oh, the offense put enough points up." Well, maybe it did, yeah, but like they've done that most games, and the offense has not held its end of the bargain for too many times. We just have to fucking repeat ourselves. So it kind of feels a little bit flat, but hey ho, do you know what I mean? You can't. Was Bruce Springsteen? You can't start a fire without a spark. So maybe we get a spark somewhere in these next 2 games, and it might just come alive. That's what you got to hope for, and that's what you're watching for. To hope that it comes together in a way that you think, all right, well, this team's improved all of a sudden in the last 5 games of the stretch. Because without that market improvement, the end is inevitable. But we'll see. Jacksonville this weekend, coming off a bye. I thought they would have fired the coach by now, but they haven't. So we'll see. Trevor Lawrence is likely back, or he certainly was projected likely back. Where that ends up, we'll see. Sitting here, but Paul, any final thoughts before we head out of here? And happy Thanksgiving to everybody before it comes.
yeah,
Celebrated a 1 year in Houston. It's just like an extra Christmas, and it's great. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody in advance from this side of the world. But any final thoughts, Paul, before we head out here?
no, I think it's. I think it'll be a tough week for them. I think watching that video back will be really difficult, and I hope it does put a bit of a spark up some arses to try and get some stuff going, or at least try and change the direction that we're slowly drifting in. So fingers crossed for that, and we go again on Sunday and see what happens. So
Yeah, let's have some games where we just go for it, and because there's nothing to lose.
yeah,
You're getting up in a privileged position here where you're probably going to win the division without being that great, and you don't get that every year. So just let it loose and be fun to watch on offense, and then even if you get beat time to time for this, 2 or 3 times at these last 2 games, you only win another 2 games, and yeah, so be it.